Hi, I'm Tom Blomain. Welcome to Graffiti. Thank you for joining us on our little literary excursion which we'll have today. We're going to do something called a Dead Poets Reading today. And what I'm going to do is read some random selections of my own favorite choices of mine from great dead poets. And to get started with it, I'm going to read some selections from this Norton anthology. Those of you who are interested in poetry, this book I checked out of the Scranton Public Library. And you can too, if you are a card-carrying member of the library system. This book, I actually have this version, but it's dog-eared and tattered, so I took the library's copy to do the reading today. And the Dead Poets Reading, I'm going to start with a selection from one of my personal favorites, and arguably the greatest modern poet, Dylan Thomas. And of Dylan Thomas's works, one of his most famous, "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night." This poem is a villanelle. Dylan Thomas often wrote free verse, but this is actually a form. And if you study this poem, you'll notice the repeating line patterns and the rhyme patterns that constitute the form known as a villanelle. He wrote this poem in 1952. Dylan Thomas lived a brief life, born in 1914 in Wales. He died in 1953 in New York City. This poem he wrote at the end of his father's life in homage to his father. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Dylan Thomas's homage to his father. Another random selection will go over to the Irish poet James Stephens. James Stephens was born in 1880. He died in 1950 and wrote a number of poems, many of which were read by Dylan Thomas in his famous readings throughout the United States. This one is kind of an interesting weather poem called "The Wind." The wind stood up and gave a shout. He whistled on his fingers and kicked the withered leaves about and thumped the branches with his hand and said, he'll kill and kill and kill, and so he will. And so he will. That poem was written in 1915. Now we'll go over to the American poet, E.E. Cummings. E.E. Cummings was famous almost as much for his unusual punctuation in his poetry and his lack of using uppercase letters. A very innovative poet, spent much of his life in New York City. He was born in 1894 and died in 1962. This poem, called "A Man Who Had Fallen Among Thieves," he wrote in 1926. It's kind of a version of the Good Samaritan story. A man who had fallen among thieves lay by the roadside on his back, dressed in 15th-rate ideas, wearing a round jeer for a hat. Fate, per a somewhat more than less emancipated evening, had, in return for consciousness, endowed him with a changeless grin. whereon a dozen staunch and leal citizens did graze at pause, then fired by hypercivic zeal sought new pastures, or because swaddled with a frozen brook of pinkest vomit out of eyes, which noticed nobody, he looked as if he did not care to rise. One hand did nothing on the vest, its wide-flung friend clenched weakly dirt, while the mute trouser fly confessed a button, solemnly inert. Brushing from whom the stiffened puke, I put him all into my arms and staggered, banged with terror, through a million, billion, trillion stars. E. Cummings. I'm just choosing random selections. These happen to be some of my favorites, but there are many, many in this book. Definitely worth reading for those of you who are interested in poetry. Another favorite of mine, Hart Crane, an American poet, very brief life, was born in 1899, and he died in 1933 when he jumped off the back of a cruise ship in the Caribbean. He was enamored of the actor at the time, Charlie Chaplin. And this poem, Chaplin-esque, he wrote kind of as homage to the genius of Charlie Chaplin. And this one he wrote in 1926. We make our meek adjustments, contented with such random consolations as the wind deposits in slithered and too ample pockets. For we can still love the world who find a famished kitten on the step and no recesses for it from the fury of the street or warm, torn elbow coverts. We will sidestep and to the final smirk dally the doom of that inevitable thumb that slowly chafes its puckered index toward us, facing the dull squint with what innocence and what surprise. And yet these fine collapses are not lies, more than the pirouettes of any pliant cane. Our obsequies are, in a way, no enterprise. We can evade you and all else but the heart. What blame to us if the heart live on? The game enforces smirks, but we have seen the moon in lowly alleys make a grail of laughter of an empty ash can. And through all sound of gaiety and quest, have heard a kitten in the wilderness. If you know anything about Charlie Chaplin's work in the movie with the little kid and the cop, the constable that was always chasing him with the finger, he's referring to that in that poem. Very interesting, especially if you look at Charlie Chaplin's work and read this poem in relationship to that. That's Hart Crane's work. This next poem, by an American poet named Randall Jarrell. He served in the military forces during World War II. And this poem, The Death of a Ball Turret Gunner. The ball turret was a kind of an upside-down machine gun turret on bomber planes that they used in World War II. And the machine gunner would be kind of in there, like just really squashed into a small place upside down, firing his machine gun. From my mother's sleep I fell into the state, and I hunched in its belly till my wet fur froze. 6 miles from earth, loosed from its dream of life, I woke to black flak in the nightmare fighters. When I died, they washed me out of the turret with a hose. That poem he wrote in 1945. Langston Hughes, another American poet, he was born in 1902 in the Deep South, died in 1967. As we might imagine, African-American born in the Deep South in 1902, had a difficult childhood, spent much of his time in Europe and France, and came back to the United States actually and participated in, was vital to the Harlem Renaissance, which occurred later. This poem, Brass Spittoons, I think really captures some of the hardships that he and many others in his position must have gone through. Clean the spittoons, boy. Detroit, Chicago, Atlantic City, Palm Beach. Clean the spittoons. The steam in hotel kitchens and the smoke in hotel lobbies and the slime in hotel spittoons. Part of my life. Hey boy, a nickel, a dime, a dollar, $2 a day. Hey boy, a nickel, a dime, a dollar, $2. Buy shoes for the baby, house rent to pay, gin on Saturday, church on Sunday. My God. Babies and gin and church and women and Sunday all mixed with dimes and dollars and clean spittoons and house rent to pay. Hey boy, a bright ball of brass is beautiful to the Lord. Bright polished brass like the cymbals of King David's dancers, like the wine cups of Solomon. Hey boy, a clean spittoon on the altar of the Lord, a clean bright spittoon all newly polished. At least I can offer that. Come here, boy. All right, this next poem I'm going to read is by my late friend Susan Ide. This book of hers was published by Keystone College posthumously. Susan died in 1993 and left a very spare collection of her work, which is in many respects stunning in quality. This particular poem is among my favorites of hers. It's called Encomium. Praise for a day when nothing goes wrong. The car starts, the vacuum cleaner eats lint. My telephone doesn't ring at all. But when I call, my friend is home and has the answer. The bathroom scale says I've neither gained nor lost. The clock tells the right time. The cats eat the food in their bowls. Coffee, salt, and hot water don't run out. The computer saves the file. Dental floss is easy to find. I remember to take the garbage out for pickup. I do not have a headache, toothache, or cold sore. I owe no letter or apology that I know of. I don't have an amputated leg, a withered arm, schizophrenia, or Alzheimer's. I don't live in a cardboard box beside a polluted river. No one is threatening me with nerve gas or knives. Stephen Hawking says there is just one way for things to go right, but many states of imperfection. I say the wonder is not the occasional miracle or the malevolent mutation, but that reproduction works at all, and daisies are commonplace. That's the poem Encomium by Susan Ide, in this book published by Keystone College after her death in 1993. This next poem is by a poet named Robinson Jeffers. Robinson Jeffers was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, spent much of his time on the West Coast. Very environmental in his writings, and in fact, our indigenous Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Jason Miller did a show on Robinson Jeffers and would enact his life in some of his readings. So this is both, in my view, kind of an homage to Robinson Jeffers and to Jason Miller. This poem is called Rock and Hawk, and he wrote this in 1935. Here is a symbol in which many high tragic thoughts watch their own eyes. This gray rock standing tall on the headland where the sea wind lets no tree grow. Earthquake proved and signatured by ages of storms. On its peak a falcon has perched. I think here is your emblem to hang in the future sky, not the cross, not the hive, but this, bright power, dark peace, fierce consciousness joined with final disinterestedness. Life with calm death, the falcon's realist eyes and act married to the massive mysticism of stone, which failure cannot cast down, nor success make proud. This poem is by Allen Ginsberg, who died in 1997. Allen Ginsberg became very famous for his poem Howl, which was regarded as pornographic by many people when it was written. Allen Ginsberg was from New Jersey and was in fact, he was a central figure in what was known as the beat movement and the beat poetry movement, jazz movement, and the Greenwich Village scene at that time. This poem he wrote when he was kind of starting out and doing odd jobs in New York City, and it's called My Alba. And Alba actually is it's sort of a poem in celebration or in lament, I guess, of the coming of day, the end of night, because it would be the time at which a person would have to leave his lover and go off about his routine tasks of the day. And this is Allen Ginsberg's poem, which he wrote in 1963. Now that I've wasted 5 years in Manhattan, life decaying, talent a blank, talking disconnected, patient and mental, slide rule and number, machine on a desk, autograph, triplicate, synopsis and taxes, obedient, prompt, poorly paid, stayed on the market, youth of my 20s, fainted in offices, wept on typewriters, deceived multitudes in vast conspiracies, deodorant, battleships, serious business, industry, every 6 weeks. Whoever drank my blood bank, innocent evil, now a part of my system. 5 years, unhappy labor, 22 to 27, working, not a dime in the bank to show for it anyway. Dawn breaks, it's only the sun, the east smokes, oh my bedroom, I am damned to hell, what alarm clock is ringing? That's Allen Ginsberg's poem, My Alba. And this poem is by the poet, American poet, Theodore Roethke. Roethke was a professor at Penn State and Lafayette College, his connection to Pennsylvania, but a phenomenal and very influential poet. He was born in 1908, died in 1963. And this poem, one of my favorites, kind of humorous poem, he wrote or was published rather, in 1964. Obviously, he wrote it before he died. This is called The Chums, kind of a reflection of his friendships of youth. Some are in prison, some are dead, and none has read my books. And yet my thought turns back to them, and I remember looks their sisters gave me once or twice. But when I slowed my feet, they taught me not to be too nice the way I tipped my hat. And when I slipped upon the ice, they saw that I fell more than twice. I'm grateful for that. That's our poetry for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed our little literary excursion on graffiti here. Come and visit the library, check out this book, and hopefully we'll be back with another graffiti in the near future. My name's Tom Blomain. See ya.